That sounds about right.
Okay, the time is now 1:35. I call to order the meeting of the Orange County Sewer District Number 1 Advisory Committee. Please note this meeting is being transmitted live via live video stream. The public can find a link to this video stream by visiting the Orange County website at www.orangecounty.gov.com, clicking on the tab for the legislature and locating the meeting on the calendar. Please silence your cell phones, tablets, and other electronic devices. Be mindful that microphones here in the statutory committee room are sensitive and robust. This time, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kelly, could you do a roll call, please?
Here. Benelli? Here. Keeney?
Here.
Ellers?
Here.
Hotel? And Tui.
Here.
Five present, one absent.
And I'd also like it to be known that Monroe Town Supervisor Tony Cardone is joining the meeting also. Thank you, Tony. All right, first up, we have Richard B. Golden. I think Joe Mahoney will be here. Joe, there's Joe.
Yes, sir.
Well, you cleaned up good. Yep. No, we were at the sewer plant.
You should clap.
I have to, full disclosure.
I kind of sense that.
Pretty much this whole side of the room was there.
Oh, that's normal.
And Anthony. So Joe Mahoney, Senior Assistant County Attorney, Eric Nenenga, Commissioner, Department of Public Works, Bob Gray, Deputy Commissioner, EF&S, Anthony Griffin, Principal Sanitary Engineer, Department of Public Works, EF&S, Mary Beth Bianconi, Delaware Engineering, and Brock Jusla from Delaware Engineering also. So if you guys could come up and join us. And Mary Beth, if you wanted to kick it off with an update, you know, and kind of pick up, we can. And thank you.
Sure. So, last time, so I'll just reintroduce myself. My name is Mary Beth Bianconi. I'm with Delaware Engineering, and we've been working with the county for quite some time on the Harriman Wastewater Treatment Plant. With me this afternoon is Brock Jusla. He's a partner with me in the firm and our senior process engineer. And so, when I look at our memo from the last meeting, we talked kind of in broad strokes about the different things we were working on. And one of the primary things that we were working on was the facility plan and the discussion of alternatives. So Brock is here to go over those alternatives today. A couple of other quick notes on this. The prior memo, we're on track. Our schedule remains the same as it was. In terms of the draft environmental impact statement and seeker, we are continuing to work on all of the aspects of that. This alternatives discussion is a big part of that as well. So that kind of covers that topic. And then lastly, the variance application. On our next steps from the last meeting was submission of something called a QAP, Quality Assurance Project Plan, for the water quality sampling for to respond to the notice of incomplete application. And that quality assurance project plan went in yesterday to the DEC. So we are on our schedule, and we're hoping that we can continue to move that along. We did have, and I'll certainly let others here speak about this. We did have a phone call with the Department of Environmental Conservation a little more than a week, about a week ago, right? It was a week ago. It was a very productive phone call. One of the outcomes of that phone call was that the department was aware that this plan was going to be submitted. So the staff that we were on the phone with let technical folks know that they should be looking out for this. So we're hoping for an expeditious review. And then just to remind everyone, Quality assurance project plan is the method that will be used to acquire the water quality data that we need to respond to the notice of incomplete application for the variance. Once the department has approved this methodology, we can go and actually take the samples, receive the sampling data back, interpret those results, and respond to the variance request. And that schedule, as we have it outlined, just for everyone to be reminded, is that we'll do the water supplier coordination coming up in June. Sampling is currently scheduled for July. We would anticipate to get the results back within 4 to 6 weeks of the sampling event. So we have that scheduled for August, and revised submission of the variance information in September. And that is the schedule we presented in April, and we're still on that schedule.
Just to say that we did agree also have a monthly conference call with the DEC moving forward, which I think is going to be very helpful. Gives the best chance of facilitating our schedule, staying on the same page.
Great.
So with that, I think we'll turn it over.
You know
Oh,
what,
sorry.
I just have one quick
Yeah.
question.
Carol,
In regard to, you said that the revised variance would be due in September, correct? Is that the variance that we've been working on, or is that the other variance you were indicating that may be in play as well?
So this is the same variance we've been working on. So to get a variance, you have to be already conducting an activity under a permit. So right now, the activity we're conducting on the permit is running our 6 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plant that we do every day. As the chairman indicated, we were there this morning to discuss these things. So to ask for a variance, you have to be doing something to ask for that permission to modify it. So right now, the variance application that's been submitted is to request relief from the water quality standards for total dissolved solids and chlorides that were included in the permit that went into effect on March 1st of 2020. So that's the variance that we've been working on. The environmental impact statement that we've been working on is to take our 6 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plant and turn it into a 9 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plant. At the end of that environmental impact process and the creation of the revised facility plan, we'll be in a position, if the county legislature determines that they would like to submit a new application for a new permit to operate a 9 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plant, from which we would also be asking for a variance from total dissolved solids and chlorides.
Okay.
And Brock will go into the reasons why treating for total dissolved solids and chloride is a real challenge. We've talked about it a little bit in big picture, but he has some actual numbers that we can go over. And this would be a reverse osmosis system that we talked about a couple of times.
Okay, thank you for the
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
great.
Alternatives.
Okay, alternatives. So, been a while since I've been in front of you guys, so it's nice to be here. Just kind of a brief overview, through the process and the initial work that we've been doing since 2016. The objective was to bring the plant from 6 million gallons a day to 9 million gallons a day. As we've gotten through that process, there's been questions about what could we expand beyond 9 MGD as well. So I handed out a packet. I'll kind of go over this briefly, and then I can get into as much or as little detail as you guys want. I could spend all afternoon explaining it. So if you have any questions, if I'm being too broad, let me know. But the first page in here, I wanted to kind of just run through. Thought it would be helpful just to have a visual representation of the treatment plant, so we can kind of understand what we're talking about.
Your Vanna.
Yep, so we can kind of talk about what we're talking about in terms of what you have, in terms of site limitations, and how that fits into the different technologies and things that we're looking at. So once we get beyond this, there'll be engineering drawings that are nearest pretty that get this in more detail. But so this is your treatment plant. Your treatment plant, you have 3 trains. Your original plant was constructed in the early 70s, which is here.
Sort of the middle.
The middle, and this would be train 1. Train 2 was constructed in the 80s.
The one that looks like
The
rubber
one
bands.
that looks like rubber bands, and then this one was constructed in the early 2000s. The combination of those 3 trains is 6 million gallons a day. So as we talk about expanding this to 9 or beyond, one of the things that we're always looking at is we're gonna try to fit it on the site. So if we think about what our site constraints are, this area right here is actually a utility easement for Orange and Rockland, plus there's a tunnel that runs a water course there. So this area becomes kind of off limits. This plant was built
So when
in,
he says this area, it's if we're talking top, middle, bottom, it's the space between the middle and the bottom that looks green and open is open for a reason.
Yeah.
There's other utilities there and we can't touch that space.
so we've also looked at, the way we looked at the plant is this piece down here, which is that train 3 built in, anyone out in 2006. That's modern, it does a lot, so we're looking at maintaining that 2 million gallons a day here and combining these two early trains into one 7 million gallon a day process, giving you your 9 million gallons a day. So I think that kind of gives us more of a visual picture. The site is clearly confined, I think it's 12.6 acres, we got Route 17, Connector Road, River Road, wetlands, so there's really no way to expand beyond the site close by. We would have to go quite a ways away in order to get more property to expand. So we're trying to work within the footprint of the facility that's there.
Just mind from the date, the year, just the year in which trains 1 and 2 were built.
So
70.
70.
Which one was train 1?
I think we're train-
78 is when it went online.
Train 1?
In that area.
So that's 78.
74 was.
And what about train 2?
That was 1988, and train 3 was 2006.
Yeah, I had the 2006, I didn't have that. Thank you.
So, so just kind of a brief overview. So the next page just takes the pretty drawing and puts it in engineering world where it's, here's pretty, but it highlights what those trains are. So if you look at that, as we talk about these trains, just again, kind of gives you a perspective of what you have here. Again, this is six.
So it's the same orientation.
It goes up, goes the other way.
Yeah. So again, you can, and that really starts to show, it shows contours, it really starts to show the limitations of the site in terms of footprint capabilities that they bring. So, through the process of, we've looked at 4 different, we looked at, for the 9 MGD expansion, we looked at 4 different treatment technologies. We looked at, they're all a variation of what's known as an activated sludge process, and there was a variety of reasons why we had to focus on activated sludge, namely your total nutrient loadings, things like that. But of the 4 processes we looked at integrated fixed film, activated sludge process, I'll refer to that as IFAS. We looked at modified Luttinger, I still can't even say it right, MLE process. Lutzig-Ettinger. And we looked at a sequencing bioreactor process, and we looked at a membrane bioreactor process. Again, all 4 of those are versions of an activated sludge process. The underlying biology that's happening for treatment is essentially the same between them. They'll look a lot different, but the underlying, the way they actually function is essentially the same. Of those 2 processes, of those 2 processes, the MLE and the IFAS effectively at 9 MGD fill the site. There is no room, they fit. We can go to 9 MGD on the site, but there's no room to ever go beyond 9 MGD. So leaving us with an SBR process, which if you look at an SBR process, the sequencing bioreactor process, and a membrane bioreactor process. So if you look at sheet SP4, which is the 3rd sheet in, if you look at what's dark in that picture, which is this, we use the footprint of train 2, which is the, what called the rubber band thing. We within the footprint of train 2 with some other modifications, we can create 7 million gallons a day of treatment capacity. 2 million gallons from train 3, giving us your 9 million gallons. We still have room on the site. You can see if we were showing this on that aerial, you'd still see a fair amount of green space in here. Fits well on the site. The other option that remains open as an option, you go to SP5, is the sequencing bioreactor option. That option allows for some expansion beyond 9 MGD. What that total available expansion, we haven't determined how far beyond 9 MGD we can get with that sequencing bioreactor, but it remains an option that we're not necessarily limited just to 9 MGD. we can go beyond that to some number. The MBR option, which I just showed, so if you go to the last page, the MBR option allows us to expand the treatment facility well beyond 9 MGD. If you look at that page, here was what we showed for the 7 million, here's what we showed to make that 7 and 2. It allows us to build, we have room to build an entire another train to bring us to bring this new rebuilt side to 10 million gallons a day, leaving the train 3 at 2 million gallons a day, bringing us to 12, to somewhere in the 12 million gallon per day range within the confines of that site.
And that would be the max for that site to get it up to 12.
Generally speaking, we're really starting to really fill that site up at 12. So,
And this is all taking into consideration so we think about like what's driving this, right? So we have the permit. So people think of the permit in terms of gallons, that's part of the equation here, but another part of it is what's in the water, right? And we've talked about this a number of times here. The water comes in, obviously it's sewage. We have to remove essentially everything that's in there that could be a negative effect on aquatic life because the flow is to the Rampo. Rampo is very low flow water body without this discharge from the Huron wastewater treatment plant. So the water quality you have to generate is really, really high quality. So these technologies, all of them can meet that water quality. They all have different spatial requirements. And since space is an issue here, trying to stay on this site and not look at other, going to other locations, which we do have an alternative to go far afield, Hudson River or the Moodna or whatever. But on this site, to use this site, part of what's driving this alternatives analysis is you're trying to stay within the confines of the plant. You have to meet the permit at the end of the day. And then the other thing that's really, really important, and we talked about this morning, is every drop of water that you generate today still has to, during construction, be able to come onto the site, be received by this wastewater treatment plant, treated to some fashion. We may get some permit relief during construction, an interim permit during construction, because we're gonna have to tear stuff out to build new things. So that makes it complicated. If you were building a greenfield plant, you could do whatever you wanted to. It's a much different process. It's a much different thought process. You still use the same technologies. You're just not trying to shoehorn them in and make them fit around all these other things.
we've got to make it fit, and like Mayor Beth says, we're gonna keep the plant running all the time. So all of the design, if you get into the detailed design, you're always, part of that is always, how am I gonna maintain operation while I'm building this? Because it'll be a 2-year construction phase, somewhere in that range. And flow's not gonna stop in that 2 years.
Just a question, are these digital? Do you have them available to send us?
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
As like PDFs.
yeah, if I send them to the legislature and get them on, I just was thinking, because, Tony's got a copy back there, but, I'm thinking
Sure.
all the other municipalities that might want a copy to look at, I think we should give it to them, and you could have it circulated to them, would be great. Thank you.
So I think, Brock, what you're saying is we looked at a lot of technologies. We looked at 4 technologies, a couple of them in different configurations. There's 2 that lend themselves to expansion beyond 9 million gallons. All 4 will get you
All
to
4
9
get
million
to 9.
gallons. There's 2 that lend themselves to getting bigger than 9 million gallons. And part of that discussion, we talked about this morning, there's little incremental changes you can make. You can go from like 9 to maybe 10 or 10 and a half. But it strikes us, and one thing I should say is we haven't done the cost estimating for this yet. Right now, we've been focused on the engineering side of it and the permitting and the regulatory and the how does it work side. We haven't gotten to the cost estimating side, but intuitively, for those tiny little incremental increases, you're probably paying more dollar per gallon than to really go that next step. Now, that said, one of the things that Brock, you should talk about a little bit is phasing.
Correct. So through this process, especially with the MBR side of the equation, is if you look at this SPA here, you can, one could build these 2, right? Have a 9 MGD facility, and you still have the room right here to where you can come back in the future and build that additional capacity to go beyond 9 to say, 12 or wherever you need it to go. That's important. The reason that we would want to be, one of the reasons we talked about, if the end of the day, today we build a 9 MGD facility, it's gonna be important that we are thinking about what the facility needs to look like in the future, because once you commit to that technology and you build that, you're kind of stuck with it. It's pretty tough to go, you could do it, but it would be very, very expensive. You'd have to undo millions and millions of dollars worth of work that you already did. So a good design is gonna be thinking about what that next phase build out looks like and be incorporating that into the design in a fashion that, it's a 30-year solution, things like that. If the growth happens where you need more capacity, you basically have a master plan already in place to go there and build more capacity within the site that's there.
So without spending the money on it today, this is one of the issues, right, is if you're building something for a future user who's not here today, right? So it's how do you right size this next step of expansion? We're at 6 right now in terms of our permit, our average day is 5 and change, right?
Yep.
So we're getting there, right? And we all know there's a lot of development interest, and there's a lot of these things out here. Some of it's already in the works, some of it we anticipate. We did ask, the chairman asked, and we've gone around as well and asked the various communities in the service area for their best predictions of increased demand in the future. So we definitely can show that a 9 MGD expansion is not unreasonable at all. When we think about the fact that this is an investment that we should be thinking about service life of this investment in terms of 20 years, something like that. So again, when we think about technologies, maximizing the site, it's important that we don't foreclose a future opportunity, and that we give you guys as the decision makers the ability to say, okay, it feels to us that it's appropriate to the right size to build to today is X million gallons, but then we need that master planning for Y million gallons in the future. And again, not to foreclose some future opportunity. If we could take a magic eraser and kind of erase this, you wouldn't build what you have. It doesn't make sense. It takes up a lot of room. It's not particularly efficient. Now, does it work? Yes. Has it served you all since, as Anthony said, 1978? Yes, absolutely. But it does, what we want to make sure we do is that we maximize your flexibility going forward. So there's a million different ways that you can treat wastewater. Lots and lots of different ways you can do it. We're trying to give you guys the options that allow you to maximize the site. I guess the other thing we should talk about, so phasing, so there's some opportunity to phase here. There's both of these 2 technologies we're talking about that will give you that an interim step and a future step. Costs. So capital costs are going to be capital costs. And between the 2 of them, it's hard to say. There used to be a time when one technology would be less expensive than another, and the industry, as you may imagine, they want to sell stuff, so they kind of try to get really competitive with each other. One of the things that we will be doing as we move forward is we're doing some operating cost evaluation. Some of these technologies, you get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of treatment capacity, but you're paying for it in terms of the cost of running a system. So we'll try to give you that information so that you can say, well, okay, we're getting a lot of treatment, but that has a commensurate cost, and the biggest cost that we think about is energy. Some of these technologies are very energy intensive. Some of them are less energy intensive. They all use energy. There's kind of no getting around that. So we'll be giving you that, again, you're weighing and balancing. You're saying, okay, to use a smaller footprint and get more treatment capacity, you may pay more in energy costs. But when you plan, we, as you know, we do a lot of work with communities all over the state on their wastewater systems. And one of the fundamental questions that we ask every community is, well, what is your overriding objective? Some of them will say, environmental compliance is our biggest thing. We need to comply. Others will say, we have a plant that was built, at a time when we had industry. And we no longer have that industry. So now we have this enormous plant, but the carrying cost is huge. And while we've had replacement jobs, they're not demanding this water service. So how do we get our system to be more efficient and meet the needs of people today, cost effectively? So we actually do projects where we mothball giant chunks of plants. So that's one objective. Your objective, and we've heard it now for a number of years, is to be able to responsibly meet the demands of your service area. So, and your environmental, is kind of those two things go together. So that's really been our focus.
Legislator.
I just want to sort of, some tiny steps for tiny tots. That tiny tot, I'm speaking to the college. What are the steps that we have to do it? Okay, we got 5 different models of it. I think you said there was 4 and 1, you know. So what does this legislative committee and physical services and legislature have to do to get a go stamp on one of the 5?
Great.
Next question is, what do we have to do to get the cost analysis to us within a certain amount of time so we can make that go stamp?
Mhm.
I agree everything you said. I'm hearing it's rational, it follows the flow, but I want to be pragmatic. Let's make it, we got to make a decision.
Great.
Because you know, at the last meeting, and I'll bring it up later because I'm all set, I want to go into executive session and I want to hear the legal ramifications of moving faster or slower.
Mhm.
You know, maybe slower is good to get the better plant and everything that works. Class M is good, but you got the breadth of the court on our back, maybe we don't have that option. So I want to go and do that, so.
So we have to do a couple of things. So all of this, so for you guys to make any decision, seeker has to be done first. You guys, this is a discretionary decision. In New York State, we have the State Environmental Quality Review Act that says that if a public body, which you guys certainly are, is going to undertake, fund, or approve anything, seeker has to be done first, right? So certainly, we're going to have a lot more discussion. We're going to be talking about costs. We're going to make a recommendation from our perspective about knowing that your objective is meet environmental and expand the plant, right? But seeker has to be completed before you're in a position to pull the trigger,
The
right?
question is that the work product that we have in order to get to that pull the trigger decision can be gotten earlier than the date. We need to know certain stuff before we can say, okay, we want to think about this. So is there certain things that will facilitate that moving forward? Okay, guys, this is gonna, you like this beautiful plant, but it's gonna cost you 3 times what we told you before. Are you still interested in playing?
Yep.
You know,
And we need
that kind
to,
of decision we have to make.
right, exactly. And we do need to, we've talked about costs. Obviously, costs right now are really, that's a huge challenge, right? I think for you guys, we need to give you relative, we're gonna give you costs that are based on the best available information that we have. But right now, I can tell you, we're getting bids back that are just crazy. And it unsustainably crazy.
And also deliverables are beyond,
8-inch,
Well, you could
8-inch
imagine.
ductile water pipe is out to 2023. So we're gonna give you cost that's our best estimate for this alternative versus that alternative. So they're all gonna be relative to each other. So you're gonna say, okay, this is gonna cost this, and the operating cost is that, and then this one's this one, and this one that, so that you can make decisions, right? So when we go back to our schedule,
Let me
right?
ask you one question. Will that, just, I'm gonna say that, will that include your best recommendations or ranking? It says, okay, we got 5 models, we think you should use this one, and this one, and this is why. So we can say, we like you, but no.
Yep.
Yes, okay.
Mhm.
Or money, this costs this, and you say, okay, rather than us kind of try to do it. You tell us as the experts what you think the ranking should be of all these decisions. Okay.
Yep, and we'll explain why too. We'll
Okay.
explain why Brock is very focused in terms of the treatment technologies on certain aspects of your speedies permit because they're the challenging, really hard ones to meet. What we don't want to have you do is spend a ton of money and then I'll be able to meet your permit, right? So there's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff, which might seem very academic, but it's really important. You guys need something you can live with every day, right? So we will be doing that. That is embedded in this process. So the facility plan will have costs and we'll have all of that information embedded in it. That's the document that has that information. Just to clarify, so we have this thing called a facility plan and we have the seeker. The seeker is for a project that takes your 6 MGD plant and turns it into a 9 MGD plant. We'll have all these alternatives in there, but turns it into a 9 MGD plant and is doing that under a variance from water quality standards for total dissolved solids and chloride. So we'd not be building a treatment unit for that. That's what seeker is for. The facility plan is going to look at all of these different alternatives and have costs, and will be the document that you can use to submit a permit for that larger plant, whatever that larger plant is, whether it's the 9 MGD plant or 12 MGD or whatever you guys decide, but it will have all that information in it. So right now, what we are going to do is put some flesh on the bones. We had a meeting this morning to get some more direction regarding some of these alternatives that we've looked at. We're putting some flesh on the bones. Our objective is to come back with relative cost analysis in July, as we laid out in our schedule. We're still on schedule to do that. And that, I think, gives you the information that you're looking for. This seeker process and all these things are intended to end at the end of this year. So that you're in a position at the end of this year, you can say, all right, we want a permit for this. And we want to do design, and we want to advance the project.
You've mentioned secret a number of times. The secret you're doing on, is it for just up to 9, or is it for 9 and a possible additional 3? Or do you have to do 2 different ones?
So we have in the alternatives in seeker, I'm glad you asked that question. The alternatives in seeker, so first we're required to look at the do nothing. We leave it just like it is, which obviously isn't a good alternative, but we're required to look at that. Then we have 4 alternatives to go from 6 to 9. We have an alternative to go from 6 to 9 and add reverse osmosis. So no variance, essentially. And it really doesn't matter which one of these biological processes we pick. They all kind of end up in the same basket at the end of the day on that. And we have an alternative to essentially give you that what maxes out the site. And that's that 12 plus. And we have a final alternative, which is treating the water offsite someplace. So either, we talked about this before, looking at a Hudson River discharge, looking at a discharge into the Moodna Basin that eventually goes to the Hudson River, but basically get out of the Ramp Power. Right, so all of those alternatives will be in the EIS. And the way the process works is in the draft environmental impact statement, which you will all receive as a draft. Right now, the recommended alternative that we went into this thinking that we were evaluating is a 9 million gallon a day plant with one of these technologies without reverse osmosis. But you could say, listen, we really want the preferred alternative to be a 12 million gallon a day plant. And that's what we would make the secret documentation. So that, I think, is to Legislator Amo's point, is when do we get that information so you can decide, right? I would suggest, since you're going through this pretty elaborate secret process, do secret on the thing you think you really want to build. So if you think you really want to build that larger plant today, let's have that be the subject to secret. The good news is we're going to have all those alternatives in there. You can select the one that you want.
So you go for the larger, but at the end of the day, if you decide on the smaller, you've already been covered.
That's the whole purpose of doing why we have, I think, 9 different alternatives, is you're evaluating them all. So that at the end of the day, you're giving yourself some flexibility.
But the one piece of data you mentioned, piece of data you gave as well, right? My last day. One data point you mentioned was what the county and the municipalities have at least projected their need going out X. Will we have that to factor into our decision? Because if we need it, right? And I know we're having trouble getting it all. But are we gonna have it so that when we start looking at it, we can say, we can't do 1, 2, and 3 because they won't produce what everybody tells us we need.
Right, yes.
So why do it?
Yes.
Right?
So we
need
have
to have
that, and as you said, we kind of have different, the different communities kind of are all providing information in different ways, which every community is different, right? We would expect that. But we do have that information that will be available. The other thing is we also have to take into consideration that, I think we talked about this before. The provision of wastewater service does not dictate what people build. Zoning dictates what people build. So we can't presume that everybody's zoning in the service area stays the same all the time. We have to kind of take what the communities are giving us at face value, but then we always add some factor on top of that, just simply because it doesn't make sense to design on a razor's edge to something that, I mean, honestly, we're all kind of getting on a crystal ball and saying, what do we think it may happen?
Well, I would have thought, you said something, that's the way I think about it, is I would imagine human frailty. Politics is they're gonna give you a number. Well, imagine you got engineers have a statistical expansion in your mind and says, whatever anybody tells us is, we're gonna add 3% to it or something. I don't know, but I would imagine that you know that. I don't, but I imagine you know that because.
We do, although I will say your community is pretty unique. You know, the service area community for this, we work all over the place and we have different, we were just talking this morning, we work in Sullivan County, in a lot of the Sullivan County communities. And, you know, their model is very different. You know, 9 months of the year, very low flow. 2-3 months of the year, 5 times the flow. So you still have to build a treatment plant that accommodates that 5 times. And everybody who's there for the 9 months says, oh, wait a minute, oh, stop right there. Why am I paying for that? So we do, but it's not an exact science. Now, if you took me to, you know, like, well, a good example, right, suburban Albany, we can pretty much predict it right down to like the drop because it's really set, it's really established, all the land uses are established, most of the land is built out. You know, there's not kind of a place to go to make it bigger, different, change it, that kind of thing. So those are relatively simple. Our industry is relatively simple. But where we have these changes in land use that, again, you guys are a county sewer district, you guys don't set zoning, it's not your job. You have a whole bunch of municipalities that do. We would love to encourage municipalities to make sure that they're evaluating their infrastructure at the same time that they're considering the zoning, so that everything kind of matches up. But here all I can really say is we're doing our best.
Yeah, I mean,
to take that into control.
I mean, it's-
Question from legislature.
If you wanted to.
Oh,
just
I was just
finish
gonna
your
say, you know, so generally speaking, from an engineering standpoint, we always like to have the ability to expand it should something change. One of the things that we've run into a lot in the last couple of years in some of the smaller communities, in more rural, smaller communities, is COVID. All of a sudden, you'll never see those kind of flows. All of a sudden, guess what? We're seeing those kind of flows, right? We're seeing so, and who could have predicted that? And you could add all the data you want, and the data said this will never happen, and then it did. So it's always nice to have that flexibility in a way that you've got some place to go. There's some, you're not just boxed in and that's all, that you've got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
The other thing is, somebody else, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, if you want.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Keep going.
No, just a quick question, you know, the other thing is that there's been a lot of discussion over the years that we may want to include more people into the sewer district, which is a little bit more than the analysis you're talking about, you know. There was a whole lawsuit over Camp Guadi, I think, at one time, you know. What happens if we get the plum for Camp Guadi and we say, my God, we want to hook them in? I'm not saying we do. Now we get that, so the county has a role in this as well, right? So they're saying, we see this kind of economic development coming our way, not just residential. It's something we need. We may be talking about that.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's complex. I'm not suggesting it isn't.
Yeah, it is.
Just getting back to seeker and the comments you made relative to, you know, needing to make sure that's in place, and then kind of the disconnect between the position we're in as a district and the fact that we don't really have ultimate control over that. The responsibility is still there for those municipalities when they change their zoning to do seeker and to take everything into account.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
just
There-
that's. an
Yeah,
important point,
you
I
bring
think.
up a really good point, Legislator Cheney. So seeker has this precept that you can't, if you're a lead agency and you're evaluating something, and if you change your zoning, you, the municipality, are the lead agency for the seeker review. There's nobody else to be that lead agency. It's totally in your control. So one of the precepts of seeker is that you can't kick the can down the road and assume that some future group out there, and the classic one is not so much sewer, but it's stormwater, right? So local municipalities generally don't, permit stormwater. Now, even if you're an MS4, you're still following the state's rules and the permit still comes from the state. So municipalities struggle with this a little bit. They say, well, I'm not the storm, I'm not going to issue the permit, right? But the seeker regulations say you can't just simply say, well, DEC will take care of it later. After we finish seeker, these guys will go get a stormwater permit. Seeker says you still have to take a hard look. Now, what does a hard look mean? It's more than a passing consideration, right? So that's one of the reasons why we're evaluating in so much detail all of these options. To your point, when the municipalities look at changing their land use regulations, that's supposed to be part of their process as well.
They gotta find water, they have to find the way to get rid of it
Yeah.
once they've generated
The
it.
fancy planning term is concurrence. You are supposed to plan so that the thing that you want in the future, the demand is met concurrently by your infrastructure and everything else. This is a big deal in places like Florida with schools. And, how do you, you have all this influx of new population and they're not necessarily all, the retirement set. How do you make sure that if you're building, 300 or 400 homes and families are gonna live there, that there's actually an elementary school, because that'll fill an elementary school. That there's actually an elementary school available for those students when they arrive. So it's this idea of that balance, right?
Yeah, just a little more. I would guess, we talk about the site constraints, but I would guess if you go back to the 70s, when they embarked on this, they knew a lot less about how things were going to grow, I think, than we do now, and that we did probably 7 or 8 years ago. But that doesn't help our predicament.
They did an assessment back in the 70s and build out for the district, which is bound by the Ramapo Drainage Basin, was 6 million gallons a day. And the plant was actually designed and laid out to be able to go from its current technology at the time, to just duplicate that once and then maybe, okay.
And we're talking about trying to squeeze 12 million
Right.
gallons on the site that they thought would have been good for
Yeah,
just
and it's
6.
expanded beyond sewer districts to the satellite communities as well.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I hope I'm not going too deep into the weeds, but just in looking at it, I had a question about, I see you've got chlorine contact prior to discharge. Is there dechlor involved also? I mean, I know that now DEC's been pushing UV, get rid of the chlorine. You shouldn't be using it. Is that something that needs to get factored into the evaluation?
So the site plans, so the site plans that we're looking at were based on, those are based on some of the processes and thought process that were in 2016. So that was the preferred disinfection at the time. UV is something that's, we talked about that earlier today, as we delve back into, get back into these, we get into these details, especially when we're down to, say, 2 alternatives. We will take another look at UV and all of that stuff. You're absolutely right. The UV and that's an option that we're gonna take.
Yeah, I mean, they don't even want to hear you say chlorine,
Yeah.
dechlorine,
Yeah.
dechlorination. So, yeah, they're pretty much pushing. And then in terms of the sludge management, is there an opportunity for, because you had mentioned before about the energy intensity of these technologies, is there an opportunity for maybe some sort of a biogas situation where we can capture the methane from that and convert it?
So on this site, if we were getting anaerobic digestion and stuff, there is no room for anaerobic digestion on the site. And from just an overall location wise, I'm not anaerobic digestion within the confines of the neighborhood that's there is probably something we need to look at as well. But there effectively is no room to do more solid management, solids processing on the site than you do now. That would have to be, that's something that needs to be pursued further. That's something that would need to happen on the site.
So methane capture works when you actually take the waste and concentrate it, because there's a kind of an efficiency issue there, right? So you need another process that you don't have in order to be able to do that. That process, we work with a bunch of places that have that type of process. We actually have one up in County that actually do generate power from that. They have it's a pretty elaborate process to do that. They have to clean up the gas. The gas is not, it's dirty, so it's not very efficient. So they actually have a scrubber with an air permit, to do that. It has worked on and off over the years. Right now, I think it's working again, pretty well. So it's something to think about, but on this site, you don't have the geography to dedicate to it. That's the challenge, right?
And it does sound a little risky.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. I mean, I think was it at lunch or in our earlier meeting, I mentioned, oh, that's the one that blew up, remember, we talked about that? They, you know, it's very volatile, that's the whole reason it burns. So we're very sensitive about being in a neighborhood, being close to a lot of people,
Right.
you know.
And those have been issues in the past for this facility.
Yeah, and animal digestion is pretty common, and you're seeing a lot of it now in terms of even taking food waste.
Yes.
Side stream waste, and you're getting into that anaerobic process where methane's generated from all that, and then you can use that, run it through generators, and generate electricity, right? And it's a good technology, there's a place for it, but it is something you need very large flow streams in wastewater plant to make it worthwhile, typically speaking.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you want to generally put right within close confines of neighborhoods. And it takes a lot of space.
Right.
Yeah, we've looked at it in industry, we do the work for Chobani Greek yogurt, we do a lot of dairy work, we do a lot of work in the food beverage industry, oral care products, where there's a lot of really, really high intensity waste streams. And even in those circumstances, which are kind of out in the middle of nowhere and you got all the land in the world that you want, it's very challenging to make the economics work. Now, today with energy prices, it would be a different story. In the past, it's been, you know, without significant subsidy on the capital construction side, even in some of those places where intuitively you say this has got to work, it should work, it should pencil, they use an enormous amount of energy that should work. It's been a challenge. It's really hard to make it work, but
Thank you.
here the constraint is just space.
Legislator Ellis?
Yeah, a couple of questions. So Mary Beth, how much of the infrastructure, say in track one, will be reused or is the whole thing gonna be removed? I mean, I'm seeing in the
Great
seventies
question.
that we're gonna be taking all this out.
So
and replacing.
ideally, so what I always try to do is we try to use as much of your existing tankage that's in good shape as we can. Concrete's expensive, so if we continue to use structures that you have, that are in good enough shape that they're gonna give you the life expectancy that you need, we try to reuse them. So if you're just looking at SB 8 would be an example, right? That MBR concept that's laid out there, right? This right here is utilizing the existing concrete from that 1987 tankage, right? So to the extent possible, and you'll see in some of the other options we lay out, where we're showing filters, those filters, the intent is to install those filters in what was the original air base for the original 87 facility. So we try to reuse, we try to reuse the structures and the buildings as much as we possibly can. So, like say we went to an MBR, if we go to an MBR process, we no longer need filters. We've got that whole building there that's got filters. So instead of just tearing the building down, we would envision paving, we would take that building and put all of the mechanics that we need for those processes within those existing buildings so that we utilize the existing building, putting rooms and doors and everything else, and it saves the project quite a bit, rather than just tearing stuff down.
Yeah, and a couple, so concrete, we have a facility where the concrete in the primary clarifiers is 110 years old. It's concrete,
Yeah, I think if we start getting into removing infrastructure major, we've got to start looking off-site. Because
Well-
it doesn't exactly,
So there's a trade-off, right? So one of the challenges, actually, you pointed out, so you're pointing to these guys,
Yeah,
right?
these
This sort of
guys,
rubber
yeah.
bandy looking ones, right? So one of the challenges there is they're relatively shallow. So when we say relatively, if you were to build them today, they do not meet today's standards. They would need to be deeper. So, but that doesn't mean we can't use them, but what you use them, the value you get out of them, you get a certain amount of treatment quantity out of that shallow tank. One of the questions that was asked this morning's meeting was, what if we got rid of that, 'cause it's taking up a footprint, pretty big footprint on the site. What if we did away with that? Because it's long paid for. Like that was amortized a long, long time ago, right? So it's kind of sitting there giving you extra life. What if you did away with it, you excavated down and made that footprint, that geography of the site have greater treatment value? How much more treatment can you get on the site? Now, it's a trade-off because you're gonna spend money tearing out that facility and replacing it with a new facility. As Brock says, concrete's really expensive. But again, to give you guys options so that you can say, well, for that cost, how many gallons am I getting? And is that a good trade-off, right? Is that a good, or knowing I could keep my existing relatively shallow tanks that are in very good structural condition and can give you a really good service life and spend X dollars, but you only get some other amount of treatment capacity. It's not quite the same. So we're going to try to give you as many of those options as we can so that you guys can say, okay, this is a reasonable trade-off. This is a valuable.
Definitely want to see the cost when it comes down to it, of a new 6 million gallon facility off-site
Okay.
compared to
That's
adding 6 million to this. Because I think we're going to be very close, if not less money, to build a new facility off-site and leave the Class A trout stream, the Ramapo alone. Because
yeah,
we're already pushing our limits, and I know the seasonal flows in the Ramapo, summertime,
really low.
it's low, and I know our standards are very high.
Yep.
In that stream.
Well, we are the Ramapo.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Said.
Yep. Yeah, you know.
Well, this could be Hudson River, if another facility,
Yep.
No, I know,
to a
but
different discharge
Yep.
location.
Greenfield, you know, so there's a balance there, right? So maybe we're not treating to such a high standard.
And I'm certain you can give us a cost estimate of a new $6 million
we
facility
can.
rapidly.
Yeah, we can,
We
we're
probably
working
have
on
that
that.
somewhere in the file.
And actually, we're actually looking at, if you were gonna build new, it would be a 9 MGD facility, right? So it would be that kind of next step, right?
Well, I think we
So,
would build a 6, because we already have currently 6.
so to maintain this and do that?
Just
So-
as a,
That's something that we should talk about, though, and folks who were here long ago will remember that this facility, as it sits, still needs improvements to continue to extend its useful life. So back when we were talking about this, we were kind of at this inflection point of, are we gonna make this thing bigger? We talked about what are the improvements that would need to be made just to keep the existing facility, give you another 20 or 30 years of service life. We used to call those the longevity improvements, right? And that was just to take what we have and extend its useful life. So if we were gonna look at keeping Harriman as 6 MGD, we would still need to make that investment, which is fine, right? We also need to then go up in the collection system and figure out if we're gonna have some amount of flow, because right now, all roads lead to this
how many
facility.
mains, general mains do we have coming in? 4 mains, 4 large discharges?
Just one large.
One giant.
One large, 4, they meet. How many come in?
There's other
Trunks,
interceptors that
yeah.
make
But how
their way
many
to.
large trunks come into the one?
There's probably, well, there's probably at least, there's 4 or 5 large interceptors throughout the entire collection
I mean,
system.
what's the largest one and the largest projected one to be?
The largest one is the one that is the final one that goes to the Harriman plant. That's a 36-inch line.
No, I understand that one, but which is the largest trunk one?
So I think the
mean,
north interceptor, right?
Probably the north
North
interceptor,
interceptor,
and that's
right.
Which comes from,
KJ.
Caristol.
Yeah.
That's a 30-inch.
and is that the highest projection for the next
Yes.
20 years to increase?
It is.
How many gallons do we
just
have
a large
roughly
this
just
year.
coming out of that one? I'm just trying to.
Well, there's 2.2 million gallons right now. If you aren't side streaming the KJ sewage treatment plant, which is running at about 600,000 gallons right now.
2.2.
So 2.2 minus 6,
Right.
2.2 minus 1, because the plant is rated at 1 MGD, and we're trying to get it to 1 MGD, the KJ sewage treatment plant. So you've got
So
1.2. right
I think
now.
where you're going is, we've kind of done this a little bit, which is go out and look in the collection system and say, where would you divert flow, right?
Main flow.
From, right, and so there's a couple of factors to think about for that.
But I don't
Is-
know discharge locations. That's,
That's the problem, right? Is where is it logical, right? And so one of the challenges is that where the high growth area is, the most logical thing is to have it come to the site. That's the most cost-effective, logical thing to do.
for the
It's
highest flow.
for the highest, right? So that's the challenge, right? So if we say, okay, if we're gonna try to divert that, now where are we diverting it to? We're building a fairly long transmission line essentially to divert that water to someplace else, the Hudson River, the Wallkill, pick a place, right? That doesn't really have customers, right? Because it's just transmitting water, it's just moving water from point A to point B. So that's part of the regional analysis that we will be presenting that so that you can kind of see what does that look like. What is the cost? What's logical? That kind of thing.
Legislator Benelli.
Just as we're talking about this, in the initial stages when we started working with you and this committee was formed, we had a lot of that data where we talked about taking things off site, everything. I don't know if you have those reports,
I
but.
do not, but it just seems to me as the cost.
Well, I think
keeps
that would be
growing.
helpful.
Yeah, we can.
For you to have that historic information, and we'll make sure that we get that to you, because I find that to be very, very helpful for you.
Yeah, my concern is that as the cost keeps going up with this remodel, new is definitely gonna be, well, it seems to me. It's a better option.
So one of the other
How
things. we
many
should-
miles of pipe would be to get to Hudson River though?
Well, to get.
Well, I'm not talking Hudson River, I'm talking Walk Hill from Chester, right?
You mentioned Hudson before, and that's a long stretch.
Hudson's like 14 miles. It's a long, long way.
There's a lot of costs.
Right.
No, putting that pipe.
Right.
But a lot of that data was in those initial
Yes.
reports when we started to work at this.
And we did do the stream analysis to determine like what permit criteria would we need to meet, those kinds of things. So we'll have that for you. One thing that we should talk about, because we talked about here is, Brock's done some initial evaluation of reverse osmosis. Because that's obviously, so people will remember, we got a permit on March 1st of 2020. That includes the water quality standard for total dissolved solid and chloride. Our current treatment system cannot achieve those standards. It's not intended to address those standards. So as we look at the alternatives, and there may be other technologies that we can consider, but the sort of tried and true industry standard technology for this purpose is reverse osmosis, which is used on a lot of industrial sites to create really, really, really clean water that goes into products or is used in the pharmaceutical industry, that kind of thing. So Brock has looked at what would the spatial requirements, flow requirements, just kind of in a big picture, and what are the costs of reverse osmosis, and this would be for your existing 6 million gallon a day plant, so not even for an expansion. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so when you run the numbers on reverse osmosis, so one thing is any technology, we have to go with ultrafiltration followed by RO, right? So it's a two-step filtration process. Under your current flows, under your existing permit of 6 MGD, we would be averaging, so what happens is when you get to reverse osmosis, so if you go back, the dissolved solids that are in the water, they're dissolved, right? So when we run through filters, whether we run through, relatively, porous MBR, membranes, any of those dissolved solids carry through. Are not removed from solution. So the only really remove those from solution is reverse osmosis. So we have a limit, your current limit for total dissolved solids to the Ramapo is 500 milligrams per liter on a maximum day basis. So if we take and look at your plant on a maximum day right now, does your worst case scenario, you gotta meet it on your worst case scenario. Now, your worst day, you gotta meet this. Would that plant do about 12 million gallons, right? It does more than we say 6 MGD, we're talking about an average. So we'll do 12 MGD over that 24-hour period. That equates to, now, what happens is about a 25% reject rate coming into your filters. So we do the math to say, I'm not gonna run everything through the RO system. I'm just gonna run enough through the RO system to knock those total dissolved solids down to 500 and the combined flow streams go to the Ramapo. So we're side streaming a portion of that, a portion of the flow, running it through RO. When it comes out, the permeate out of the RO doesn't have any dissolved solids in it. We blend those back together to get to 500. Under your worst case, one of your worst day, your reject rate is almost 2 million gallons a day of brine water you have to side stream and truck off site. Your average day is 200,000 gallons a day. Right now, we're looking at having to truck that to New Jersey. So, we didn't lay out a site plan of this, but we're looking at somewhere in the tune of just in trucking costs alone, you're somewhere in the tune of $18 million a year just to truck this. You're talking about 200,000 gallons a day just trucking alone.
And disposal, right?
trucking it. Yeah, and then you got, so right now you're looking at, you're bringing it, the facility that we would see, the closest facilities that can take that are facilities that are discharged in the Atlantic. So we're looking at, and we talked to some folks at a facility in New Jersey. I think it was, I want to say 120 miles round trip, something like that. 200,000 gallons a day, a large tanker truck is hauling 10,000 gallons. So minimum.
That would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of them are So it's so does everybody understand? So the reverse osmosis system, if you ever run a pool filter, right? You know that like you open it up, you run it for a little while, you switch the thing, it goes into backwash cycle, and that backwash goes to waste. So that's what he's talking about, is the filter runs, it runs a whole bunch of water through, but then there's this byproduct, you create a waste product from doing this. That waste product is brine. It's really, really salty water, which obviously we're now not putting in the ground, but we still have all this salty water that has to go someplace. So right now, what we've looked at is that you could haul that off in tanker trucks, right? Average tanker truck is usually really around 6,000 gallons. So, you've got a line of trucks and you've got a cost of at least 18 million a year just for that. Now that hasn't, you haven't talked about building anything. You haven't talked about the cost of operating it. This is just the cost to get rid of it. And we also haven't talked about, there's no space to build this thing. You would need, what did we say, what size tank do you need to hold on to the?
Well, you would need, if you had 3 days under your current flows, to have 3 days under those hard conditions.
Storage?
You need 6 million gallons. And when you filled those 6 million, you had 6 million gallons in those tanks, that's coming off the site truck at a time. So it's.
In other words, it's not doable. It's not doable. So why are we doing this? Since it's obviously futile, right? So to get the variance, right, we have to document why compliance doesn't work. And so compliance doesn't work for a variety of reasons. Now, I think sitting around this table, we can say, well, the cost, right? But the regulatory world doesn't consider cost. It's not their problem, not their issue. That's not their thing. So we're worried about the cost. So what we have to look at is what are the actual implications of this. We look at it from a physically, how would you do this? Where would you do this? Is this even reasonable? 6 million gallons of storage is acres and acres of water. It's acres of land that in tanks of water. So then we can also look at the carbon footprint of reverse osmosis. So this is one of those, we're trading things, right? We're back to trading stuff. So there's an environmental benefit to meeting the water quality standard. That the Ramapo River will theoretically not have a total dissolved solids load of greater than 500 milligrams per liter, which is a drinking water standard, and intended to obviously support aquatic life. So that's a benefit. What's the negative side of this? So if we look at the carbon footprint of operating a reverse osmosis system, there's the power, which, we're not 100% green here. That's just not, we're not there yet as a state and we're not there as a region. So there's a carbon footprint associated with that. There's a carbon footprint associated with the trucks, which are all going to be diesel trucks, right? There's a cost in terms of vehicle miles traveled between here and New Jersey. Then there's where we're sending this is to an enormous wastewater treatment plant that's going to receive it as influent. They're going to run it through their system. So there's the cost of that, which you're paying for, that's the $18 million. But there's sort of the environmental cost because they're going to use power and they're going to use chemicals and all these things. And then they're going to discharge into the Atlantic Ocean, which is the Atlantic Ocean. And so it can absorb it supposedly without a negative impact on the environment. But let's track back all of the negative impacts that we just talked about. So the variance process does take into consideration sort of social issues. Well, the carbon footprint's a big social issue, right? That's a big thing. There's also sort of air quality issues here in the lower Hudson Valley. So we're going to be adding how many trucks to the road that are, your standard honey wagon's a diesel truck, right? They're not, electric vehicles. So we're documenting all of this as part of the variance application, because at the end of the day, the DEC their job is to say, you must comply with the water quality standards. Right? They didn't create the water quality standards. The legislature and or Congress, depending on which water quality standard we're looking at, did. The department's job is to be the policeman and say, you must comply. We're saying, wait a minute, compliance is not, it's not possible to comply, and here are the many reasons why. In order for the department to agree with us, they need a justification. Because out there in the world, there may be folks who are gonna say, wait a minute, you know, there's environmental quality standards for a reason. They protect, and then some of us are old enough to remember when water bodies were in pretty bad shape, right? So those water quality standards are really important. So we have to be able to describe and explain back to that trade-offs and balances that yes, while you may be able to get to under 500 in the Ramapo, let's talk about the larger environmental impact of the solution. You know, the solution could be worse than solving the problem itself. So that's this process that we're going through. We were talking this morning about how far down the rabbit hole do you go. And I think it's to enough of a point to document that so that a reasonable person could look and say, what is the environmental benefit of achieving a water quality standard at Harriman versus the environmental detriment of actually doing it? So that's the kind of information that we need to present.
Okay, Mary Beth, where would, we be moving on to next, like as far as what you need from the legislature? So I know that, you're gonna put together these options and then it needs to go to physical services.
Right, so we'll put together, we'll have some more information. Our target is the July meeting, so that we can talk about kind of some more details about costs and have that relative, what are those trade-offs? And this won't be, we're not gonna talk about RO and that because we've already decided that's nonsense. It's really gonna be more about, here are 9 million gallon a day options. Here's the options to get bigger than 9 million gallons a day and phase
Without
in
TDS.
without total dissolved solids, right? Because every presumption we have going forward is that you're not meeting the water quality standard. So from there, we'll need some guidance from here in terms of, to your point, Legislator Benelli, what is the thing that we're conducting secret on? Are we conducting secret on a 9 million gallon day plant? Are we conducting secret on 12 million? Is it a 9 that can become a 12? Is it what is it? So that when we get to the environmental impact statement and that we're going to send to the public and involved agencies for review, we're saying our preferred alternative is this. This is what we want. At the end of the day, we finish seeker, we issue findings. Findings lay out the path forward to implementing the project. So we need a permit, we need this, we need a variance, we need that. What project is going to be covered by that environmental review? So that would be very important.
And will that be presented at the July meeting?
We're going to present those alternatives, yes, so that you can start, and we'll keep working on the background and then because we have to put them all in there anyway. It's really going to be which one goes in the section that says, and the preferred alternative is sort of like, you won the lottery.
Excuse me, is that the July Physical Services Committee, or is it the June Physical Services for July legislature?
I think our original target was this meeting in July. For July.
And it would ultimately be, I think Mary Beth is what your intent was, it will ultimately be a decision for the full legislature.
Right.
Proceeding through physical
We
services.
still have our 5 options.
You'll have, a whole bunch.
5, 6.
At least, because that will also include, to your point, offsite. What does offsite look like? Those kinds of things. With offsite, the other thing we do have to discuss are the regulatory implications of offsite. It's not, we get our water here that comes to this plant from multiple different basins, and there are some regulations regarding taking water out of one basin and putting it in another basin, because theoretically, you could be deep, kind of like the Colorado River, right? They're taking all the water out of the Colorado River basin, which is just making it go down, 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 and it eventually gets discharged to the Pacific. And that's a problem for them. They have less and less water because they're not recycling, they're not recycling it, returning it. We kind of have that situation here, so we have to describe and discuss what that means.
So where is most of the water coming from this facility?
So most of it is coming from the Moodna. So not as much from the Ramapo, because the Ramapo's watershed is really small. But even though we have a lot of use in the Ramapo, but right, if we have a 6 million gallon a day plant and about 2 of it's coming from the Ramapo, the balance is coming from the Moodna. Is that reasonable, what'd you say?
It's already taken somewhere else. and put this-
Yeah, the polls are almost about 50-50.
50-50. Moon and- Yeah, so there you go.
This was brought up as a concern in the, when we did the original scoping document.
Was.
There were some concerns about the moon and the basin
It's
transfer
actually
from the
56,
moon.
44.
There you
For the
go.
round. That's close to 50.
Yeah. And that interbasin transfer has been going on since these plants were built in the 80s, right?
Legislator.
Because, Mr. Chairman, you're asking a question, Legislator Cheney, about the timing. You know, you said July, so what happened to the June meeting? We kind of meet monthly.
Right.
We do, and why just get June and go to July? There could be a reason, I'm not, let me just
So
finish.
the Brock has time to get the numbers together.
I figured that was it, but I'm, you know.
We'll be here at the June meeting to report on progress as well.
Yeah, let me finish my point. I think we have to, because time is of the essence, I think we'll hear later if we get into executive or at some point. I think it is anyway, that maybe we have to look at when the next meeting is gonna be. Are we gonna move it so coordinate so it can get to the July physical services? In a way that it can get no later than the August regular meeting kind of thing. It might mean not the 17th of July, but maybe the 5th of July or something, left for 2 weeks, so we can get it through the process to get to you. So we can get down the line rather than wait till the latter part of July and then we're into September with the meeting now. You know, it's not really working now. So we gotta have it fit our schedule. So that we're able to make a decision and move it along. That's all. I understand we're not gonna change it and force you to get it in June, but maybe there's a way we can get it, half the loaf can get done. We can find a middle point that we can get it done so we can make our process work. That was
So like moving the sewer meeting back a little bit, a week to.
yeah, just so that we can.
To give them more time and to still have time to get to physical.
Yeah, if we can make a decision second week of whatever, of July or first week of whatever, last week of June, or something along that line, then it could be on the July physical services and then be on the August floor. I don't know, just pick time, we're trying to stay with our one.
I mean, if you guys want to come back to us and tell us what you would like, when you'd like to have that meeting, we can look and see what
Okay,
it takes to
sure.
get there, right? Rather than-
Right, Barry, is that, am I thinking right or am I wrong?
No,
Let's give a date.
I would
Here's a
like
date we
to,
need to do this so that we can get to you by the July meeting. So we're on the floor of August.
You would have to move your July in order to get it onto his agenda. If you had it in July, you'd have to have it like right after the floor,
Right at.
that week.
July 25th, Barry, is your meeting.
So we go into the last week of June or something. So we
So
definitely-
you could have it the week of the 11th.
This meeting, the week of July 11th?
Yeah, the week of July. If his meeting's on the 25th.
And that's what happened.
Yeah,
on the calendar.
yes.
it is.
So the agenda typically would be set on that Wednesday, the 20th.
That's
If
correct.
we were at the 22nd,
Yeah, we were originally at the 22nd.
that would be the week prior, we'd be moving it up. to-
22nd of July is a Friday.
Or is it Friday? But it was the July 20th. I'm sorry, we were originally looking, because normally
Right.
this committee's been meeting the
The
third.
Wednesday.
Yeah,
The
it's-
third,
The
so we'd be
third,
moving it up 1 week.
but I think he would need time to get it on for the physical agenda. I mean, this is a little too tight.
July 11th would be too tight.
no,
July
13th.
11th.
13th would be good,
13th.
or even the 14th.
There's nothing that week right now. That's our bluff week.
So, I mean, we can make the 13th or 14th of July work.
Yeah, sure. We were planning on the 20th, so it's only a week.
So I was thinking.
We were better under pressure anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would say that since it's a lot of information to digest, that you get it to us prior
In
to
advance,
us
sure.
coming in here and starting to take a look at all of this stuff.
Even in increments, right? You have that?
Yeah.
You have that.
Sure, what date works best for you? You said July.
Whatever, I will make it work.
July
I just want to
13th.
give enough time for it to be processed, decided here, get on
Yeah.
physical for
To get
the
to August
25th.
session.
Sure.
Mary Beth, what did you have there, the 13th or 14th?
Yeah, that would work, either one works, the 13th would be the Wednesday, the 14th is the Thursday, either one, I think is, doesn't matter to us, right?
All right, so let's go for the 13th, July 13th.
It's fine, okay, 1:30.
But then Katie said, asking, can we get it before?
Yes,
We're also gonna do progress in June.
yeah, so we should, what? If we did the third Wednesday, that would be the 15th
Of June?
of June.
Okay.
And that's what we've been doing, but
Mary Beth, let me ask a question because I want to see if I got it right. I think we talked about 3 data points. We're going to have data on the cost, we're going to have data on the demand for people asking for. We're going to have data on which one of these trains we're going to use, which one of these plans we're going to use. So I guess if we got it, because what Katie's talking about, how do we interpret it, read it?
we can have the demand data.
If we got one piece of
for
it,
the
at least a couple
June
days in
meeting.
advance, we have a chance to read it, and that's when coming later, we still could read that rather than wait and have it all come at once.
Yeah, we can have
Someone
the
who's been
demand,
on a planning board and came home on Friday afternoon with a box of flats.
yeah.
How do
We
I
can
get them
have the
ready by Monday? I didn't know how to do that.
We can have the demand information for June. For the this June meeting.
And the June meeting,
Said
if
you
it
can
was
have
too,
demand meet information for the June meeting.
Yes.
Perfect.
so
Thank
So you
you.
take it in bites.
the,
I
the,
like that.
the June meeting, if it was,
Tiny touch.
16th.
Right
no,
here.
it'd be the 22nd.
Eric, you think it's gonna
If it
be?
was- if it aligned with,
Yeah, I meant to say,
with,
yeah,
I mean, realistically,
rules.
because we're trying to push, I think we're trying to push this.
the 15th,
Yeah, I mean, that depends. I mean, you guys need time
no,
to digest
22nd.
it.
okay,
There'll be
22nd,
discussion during this meeting and then there may be some outstanding questions.
that'd be the 4th,
We could always
Yeah, but
decide that you need
our
more time,
legislative
we should
session
push that
isn't
to
until
July.
July
What's your-
7th,
Realistically, I
right?
think it's,
unless we're not,
June,
You may, it
we're
depends
talking
on,
June.
We've got a lot of conversations.
yeah, just.
you may be pushing it to make a decision in one meeting, but
I think it's a big-
it's a. I mean, hopefully-
They pay us to be money for it. They-
Well, that's the goal. If we don't reach it, as Eric just said,
That's right.
then we'll say, okay, let's get together next week and take a look at it again after
Yeah.
we've had a chance to weigh all the information.
Kind of, it is always good to set your dates, set your goals, and then if they slip, they slip. But
And then adjust
I
that.
mean, I read something that says, you know, those who plan always do better than those don't, even though they never stick to the plan. You know?
Very well said.
so legislative session in July is the 7th, I believe. It's the first Thursday of the month.
Correct.
Which means physical services would be on the 27th. Rules would be of June, rules would be on the 22nd of June, and we usually meet before the rules committee meeting.
Correct.
So I would suggest that we plan on our next meeting on June 22nd. And then July 13th, and the document that we would be considering at the Physical Services Committee meeting on the 25th, and then subsequently at legislative session the first Thursday in August, would be the seeker document.
So it would be the alternate, to pick which one of the alternatives, so it's the alternatives portion,
Okay.
right, of that, because I mean, you
To
have,
approve the facility plan,
pick which
Mary Beth,
one.
it's the facility plan.
approve the facility.
Well, it's not necessarily approve it, it's evaluating the alternatives presented within the facility plan. And I believe the authority of this committee is to provide a recommendation. I haven't looked at the resolution for a number of years, so excuse me. And then ultimately, the legislature will look at it as it passes through your committee.
Looking
To
at the
make-
facility plan and accepting the facility plan, is that, what action
Yeah,
is the
what
legislature
are we
going
actually
to
doing?
take?
I believe, and I'll look into it and provide it for the next meeting, is that you evaluate the facility plan and make a recommendation to the full legislature, to your committee and the full legislature, with regard to the alternative, the recommended alternative contained in the facility plan. And that is, what alternative do you, this committee, recommend to be accepted?
Be the first step.
And pass on that suggestion to your committee, and again, the same thing. And ultimately, the legislature has to decide, has to come up with a preferred alternative. Not deciding until after for secret. So the preferred alternative is where
Right.
is the first step.
Serves as the basis for seeker.
Correct, yeah, so we're back to, so we'll make a technical recommendation we'll work with Anthony and Bob and Eric and come up with, is it an MBR or an SBR is really the question that we're asking, right? And what configuration,
Size.
and then what size.
What do those letters mean?
MBR is membrane bioreactor, so that's the one that has a smaller footprint, but it's
That's
more
okay.
expensive to run. And an SBR is a sequencing batch reactor,
Okay, gotcha.
bigger footprint, less expensive to run, but they both get you the
I
same
just
price.
found something I didn't know. I didn't
Yep.
know.
So we'll make that recommendation, but then I think really the question before you guys is, do you want to build a 9 million gallon a day plant now, or do you want to build, and with the potential to expand, or are you looking at building a 12 million gallon a day plant, or?
Or something.
And what time will we be told how this is gonna be funded?
Right,
I mean, that's part of that whole thing,
Right.
you know,
We're gonna give you
who's gonna pay for
costs,
it?
Right, we'll give you costs, we'll give you some
That brings up the
operating costs.
governance issue.
Right. Okay, so we decided on meeting dates, correct? The 22nd of June at 1:30
Yes,
and July 13th at 1:30,
yes.
okay? Okay, and for the June meeting, we can have that demand information that we received from the communities and have a little mini report on that. That's actually part of the environmental impact statement. So there's a little section in there on that. And we'll probably have some other things that we'll try to be able to.
We will push to have as much of this kind of stuff as we can,
right.
right? So the more we can report, you know, the better. So we'll push to be as far into that in June as we can with the same topic.
Just a question of you, Mr. Chairman, is it whatever they decide works in terms of the time? Could you get it and sort of have it cleaned up so we all get it, so we know this is what you're going to expect from us to make a decision in each of these days?
Yes.
And you're going to do it rather than wait, have you tell us, and so I didn't know that. If it comes to you, and you could say on the agenda, here are the levels of decisions when we're going to make it.
So we'll provide, so obviously there's a lot of, there'll be drawings and there'll be all these other things, but we'll also provide like sort of a summary document that's really straightforward, that kind of just for, you know, in simple terms explains,
I got a guy,
this is what, right?
simple
because-
terms.
Well, we need all those details to be able to build it. I think from a decision-making perspective, right?
Mary Beth, on the 22nd, you could probably tell me by then when we could expect it before July 13th. So if we
Yeah,
get like the
yeah,
11th or so, a
absolutely,
few days ahead of
absolutely.
time.
Absolutely.
Okay. Keep us on task, Master. Get the bullwhip out, Mr. Chairman. Move us along.
Well, we meet weekly, as you know, we have our own progress meetings with EFNS with the consultant. And Peter takes part in those now, so.
Yeah.
As the information gets developed,
Right.
whatever needs to get to you guys, will get.
I just wanted to comment on, I think that was an excellent idea. I think it's worked very well. And thank you for all, you know.
Meet every day if we have to.
No, and your
Weekly is
attention
good.
to all of this detail has been very, very helpful. And including Peter in that has been, I think, helpful for us because we communicate all the time. So I think we're working very collaboratively together very well, and I thank you.
Good, good. I think now we have the date set. I'm just going to go back here, just two more quick items. Bob, if you would just say where we are with the sewer meter.
Yeah, the two items, the sewer meter, we're developing, with the consultant is working on we're gonna put out the bid, us buying the meters. And so those specs are being
And
put
then your
together.
folks would be installing them.
Yes,
Okay,
and
so-
there's also a contract for the monitoring and the collection of the data. So
Go along with it. So
it's all
that,
being put together.
that's being put together now. and
Yeah.
then When do you anticipate that would go up?
It's with our consultant right now, so as soon as it gets through our consultant, we're going to send it over to general services. I would say probably 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay, great. And then also with the Village of South Winter Grove and the Chester improvement test.
Yeah, there's the test that's going on at South Blooming Grove. The annual system is at Chester, right? They have an annual system installed. We're testing an installation of the annual system at South Blooming Grove. That started Monday, that's ongoing all week. Data's being collected. The idea being to control the hydrogen sulfide gas, so it's the issue in Monroe, we can solve that. So that's underway right now.
Well, that, was-
Yeah,
it's been
you know, South Blooming Grove was very cooperative to get that. And they're financing this, so it's a good step.
Great, glad to hear that started up. I think that wraps us up for today, unless there's any other questions or comments. Michael?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you know, I said at the last meeting, I was going to call for an executive session to talk about legal implications of what we're doing at this point. And so by way of introduction, you know, I have a resolution I could use, but I want to just kind of throw it because we're a working team. You know, what we heard today is that if everything works exactly as we hoped it would, we have at least a half a dozen potential hanging delays out there that we talked about. You know, can the seeker process meet the demand? Can we get it done? You know, can we get the materials that we need? What delay will that have? What about production delays? And of course, now we just talked about legislative to say what our decision-making, and our decision-making spreads out 2 or 3 months. That's a factor. And the funding is an issue, and that may drag us out. So all of those may not be significant, but maybe together they are. And so my question is to Joe, and I guess, and because of timing, we can do, maybe we can do it on the 25th, if it's your choice, Mr. Chairman. But we really need to ask the question, what happens if it gets delayed beyond our timetable and the court is not happy with us, given because of a lawsuit or something that comes up regarding this process, but we're not moving fast enough, that they won't accept this, and we may be at risk or something. So it's the kind of thing I don't want to get into. I don't want to say anything specifically on the record, but you know, there's some questions we could ask about that and say, is it a real issue? And I'm only looking for legal advice. I'm not trying to load anything up here. I don't know.
I'll be happy to talk about it in the executive session.
Yeah, if we're getting late now, it's fine. It's not that urgent. We have to.
Next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, so you can, it's fine, but I want to say, I wanted to do it this time, but we accomplished so much. I think we could wait to do it on the 25th, or whatever, the 22nd. Okay, we'll do that. And
So we'll
I'll
do
try
that
I'll put a,
at the meeting on the 22nd. And,
so if you could just put on the agenda just to evaluate the costs
yeah,
and the legal issues, and then without saying, then when we get there, we can make a motion for executive. I guess that's all.
and it's probably good to have Betsy,
Sure.
try to get that on her schedule too, so we got Betsy and Joe together.
Okay, good. That's all. I won't make it then. That's fine. Okay, you think, Katie?
No, I think
Let's
it's
get,
very productive.
okay, I didn't mean to push it.
Anybody have anything else?
No, I think it's fine. 'Cause it's-
All right, well, thank you, everybody, and that concludes our meeting for today for the District number 1. Thank you all.
Thank you.